To me, yeah. Put it in. Oh!
All right. All right. What do you think, Ian?
Could have been a more spectacular finish in the top corner, but all right.
I'm finding things out about myself that I never knew. And it's like there's been a brick wall up for so many years and it's been knocked down and all this light's coming in and even the world looks more colourful.
Castaway changed lives. Tomorrow at 9 on BBC1.
He was a ferocious hunter.
Al is frequently wounded.
Born into a world of hard knocks.
He has a torn arm, ripped claw and smashed ribs.
A young romantic.
She is not interested.
He lived to kill or be killed.
These youngsters only have a few weeks of protection before the mothers view them as fast food.
From his first breath to his last, life for Big Al was an enormous adventure. This is his story. A Walking with Dinosaurs special, 4:30 Christmas Day, BBC1.
Victoria Wood is having a few friends over on Christmas Day.
Yeah, what was you banging on? I should like to know, as I never so merry at Michaelmas. Our Christmas pudding is down there somewhere, and you can be sure we shall dig till we get it. Go in! Catherine!
Look out, rationing, and being in danger of death have been a real tonic to me.
And you're all invited.
The backs are back in the bread bin now, not coming out till New Year's. Promises, promises.
Victoria Wood with all the trimmings, 9:20 Christmas Day on BBC1.
This year, for the first time ever, the BBC will join the royal family as they celebrate Christmas at Sandringham. With a sermon by the Archbishop of Canterbury, carols and hymns, join morning service from Sandringham, live at 10 to 11 Christmas Eve morning on BBC1.
Now on BBC1, it's Through the Night with BBC News 24.
Two women have been remanded in custody, charged with the attempted murder of a 13-year-old boy from Littlehampton. Danny Herbert has regained consciousness at Guy's Hospital in London, where he's being treated for 25 stab wounds. Nearly 24,000 farmers and farm workers have lost their jobs because of the farming crisis. That's according to a report out later today. Statistics from the Ministry of Agriculture show that an average of 450 people quit farming every week in England. The worst hit areas are mixed farms, followed by pig and poultry farms. The National Farmers Union blame the burden of government red tape and the strength of the pound for the industry's problems. The National Lottery Commission have been meeting to decide who will win the licence to run the lottery for the next 7 years. The 5 commissioners met in private and an announcement is expected on Wednesday. Both contenders, Sir Richard Branson's People's Lottery and the existing operator Camelot, say they're confident of victory. A spokesman for the National Lottery Commission said it was extremely close and could go either way. The pop star Madonna and her fiancé, the film director Guy Ritchie, have now arrived in the Scottish Highlands ahead of their wedding there later this week. They landed by private jet at Inverness Airport and amid tight security were whisked away to Skibbo Castle, where their fairy tale wedding will take place on Friday.
Through clear blue skies, the jet bringing Madonna and her family north touched down at Inverness Airport at lunchtime. It was a traditional Highland welcome, but for the occasion the Piper had mastered one of Madonna's biggest hits. An aide carried her daughter Lourdes off the plane, followed closely by the bridegroom Guy Ritchie. And the star herself, resplendent in a tartan coat. Baby son Rocco was last to emerge, brought to a waiting car by a nanny. Despite the intense media interest, only a handful of fans turned up.
It's the excitement of seeing a superstar, well, a world-famous person in Inverness. It's just so unbelievable.
It was great to know she was coming to Inverness, and I just say to them congratulations, and I hope they have a really nice Highland welcome.
The entourage then sped off for the hour's drive north to Skibbo Castle, where the couple will spend the week relaxing before their wedding there on Friday. Dornoch is very much a town in waiting tonight for the biggest media event ever in this area. But the only chance locals will get to glimpse Madonna and Guy Ritchie is when they have their son Rocco christened here later in the week. Carol Jones, BBC News, Dornoch.
Yes, it's that time of year again, so of course the annual race to be top of the pops at Christmas has begun in earnest, with Westlife bidding to topple Bob the Builder from the #1 spot. Rebecca Lovell takes a look at the new and not so new contenders for the top pop spot.
The Builder's at the top of the ladder, but can he cement his chart success and stay there for the festive season? Most people's money is on the 5 boys from across the water, Westlife, with their new single released in time to be wrapped up under the Christmas tree by December the 25th. They themselves are being very modest about blowing their own trumpet.
I think Christmas is just too hard to sort of predict. It's a really weird sort of time of the year for people.
The nostalgia factor isn't forgotten this year either, with actors back in their wombling costumes. But even the man behind those furry litter collectors knows their chances aren't good.
We're not shooting for a #1 with it. You never should in this day and age. The charts are so funny anyway these days. They're not like when I was a lad. And so you just make the record, have fun with it, and hope it does okay.
Now hear the angels sing. It's well known that musical taste disappears up the chimney over Christmas. A quick glance at past festive hits confirms this. We all remember this from the 90s. Even the yuppie cutthroat culture of the 80s cried out for a soppy #1 over Yuletide. But back in the 21st century, it's not just Liquid News analysing the data. The popsters have their own predictions.
Westlife, without doubt. It'd probably be Eminem.
Yeah, I'm with Bob the Builder bouncing around the house on Christmas, yeah.
I'm a plumber called Ted or something.
Wednesday's midweek chart is likely to single out a winner. But in the season of peace, goodwill and no musical taste, there are some strong contenders. Rebecca Lovell, BBC News.
We'd better get some work done.
Well, from Bob the Builder to the weather, here's Joe Price.
Hello again. Well, we do have some mist and fog patches to contend with for the northeast of England and the Midlands for the overnight period and into the morning, posing difficult driving conditions. And out towards the west, we've also got a band of rain and cloud developing. Now, that will steadily track northwards and eastwards throughout today, and that will push really for much of the country, bringing quite difficult conditions on the roads. We've also got some blustery conditions, particularly out towards northwestern parts of Scotland and Ireland, so do take care as you're driving through the drive time period. Now, that rain, don't forget, is falling on saturated ground, so further flooding could be possible, and up to 30 millimetres is likely to fall during Tuesday, and that's well over an inch, particularly for western areas and particularly for higher ground through Snowdonia there in Wales and the Brecon Beacons. There you can see that rain and cloud developing for the morning picture. Also those southeasterly gales just pushing across western parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland there. For this spine of the country really, and through the Midlands out towards the eastern coast there, you might just see a drier picture for the morning. Not much in the way of sunshine though, I'm afraid, and again those mist and fog patches could persist well into the morning. But that rain and cloud will steadily push northwards and eastwards throughout the day. Perhaps a brighter picture for western and southern parts of Ireland later on into the day. Temperatures what we'd expect at this time of year, but in the cloud, the rain and the wind, it really will feel a lot colder than the 6 to 7 we're indicating in Scotland. At best, you're looking between 10 and 11, which is around about 49, 50 Fahrenheit for the West Country and for Wales. So for Wednesday, we are seeing this front just straddling through northeastern parts of Scotland, down through Wales and into the West Country, which means more in the way of rain, perhaps a drier picture for western coasts and southern coasts of Ireland and for the southeast.
It's been a year where paper fortunes were made and lost. Some ventures conjured money from thin air, whilst others changed the face of the currency we use. A week of programmes looks back at a year of money matters. Business 2000, next week, Monday to Friday on BBC News 24.
Its name alone has the power to chill. It's one of the most radioactive places on Earth. It was an area known for its rich quality land and guaranteed employment. Officially, 31 people died. The unofficial figure is tens of thousands. After years of lobbying by the West, Chernobyl is to close. But what are the human and economic costs? Chernobyl, the forgotten fallout. Saturday 1:30 on BBC News 24.
The President-elect meets the head of the Federal Reserve amid doubts over his tax plans. A blow to Netanyahu as Israel's parliament rejects an early election. Europe's plans for a super jumbo jet threaten a trade war with America. And a lone round-the-world yachtswoman has gone to the aid of a fellow competitor. Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Clarence Mitchell. George W. Bush has spent the day in Washington at a series of meetings preparing himself for the presidency. He started with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, went on to Congress, and later interviewed possible candidates for cabinet positions. On Tuesday, the president-elect sees President Clinton and then Vice President Gore before returning to Texas.
Greenspan and Bush, the double act, now responsible for America's and maybe the world's economic health. The president-elect eager to be seen with the bank chief who has masterminded U.S. prosperity. It was George Bush's first day gliding through Washington in a presidential limousine. Next stop, the deeply divided U.S. Congress. Another choreographed moment, two Republican and two Democratic leaders brought together by a president-elect looking for cooperation.
I told all four that there are going to be some times where we don't agree with each other. But that's okay. If this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. Just so long as I'm the dictator.
That joke may backfire. Bush already pushing a sweeping trillion-pound tax cut. The Democrats politely telling him to think again.
The only real choice for us is to recognize that bipartisanship isn't an option, it's a requirement.
All this talk of bipartisanship won't last long if the president-elect persists with his plan for massive tax cuts. He has to tread very carefully if he wants a working relationship with his Democratic opponents. He's on safer ground with appointments announced over the weekend. Secretary of State, the widely admired retired General Colin Powell. Condoleezza Rice, the new National Security Advisor. Bush was asked whether his promotion of women and minorities carried a message.
You bet. That people who work hard and make the right decisions in life can achieve anything they want in America.
Maybe anything is possible after this strange election. Today, Hillary Clinton invited First Lady-in-Waiting Laura Bush to the White House for tea. They held hands. For now, everyone trying very hard to be nice. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
In the Middle East, the Israeli parliament has rejected a bill to dissolve the 120-member Knesset and hold early elections. It's being seen as a setback to the plans by the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to relaunch his political career. The decision came just moments after the Knesset passed a law allowing Mr. Netanyahu to take part in a special election for the post of Prime Minister. Mr. Netanyahu said before the vote that he would challenge Prime Minister Ehud Barak only within the framework of a general election.
After a long day of high political drama, the former right-wing leader appears to have counted himself out of the race for Prime Minister. Mr. Netanyahu said he would only stand if the Knesset dissolved itself and there was a general election. But despite his best efforts to persuade legislators to back him, Mr. Netanyahu was rebuffed. The Knesset, though, did pass a bill that would allow the former right-wing leader to stand as a candidate in a ballot just for Prime Minister, an option that Mr. Netanyahu has rejected. And now it appears that Mr. Netanyahu's hopes of returning to power, despite his current public popularity, have been dashed. The election for Prime Minister is now expected to take place in 7 weeks' time, with the leader of the right-wing opposition, Ariel Sharon, standing against the current incumbent, Ehud Barak. Today's political intrigue in Israel has come as Palestinian and Israeli negotiators prepare to travel to Washington in an effort to reach an elusive peace deal and to end the continuing violence in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Richard Myron, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
Well, Malvern Benjamin, the Vice President of the Likud party here in Britain, said that despite the Knesset's decision, there are still several options open for Mr. Netanyahu.
This evening there are primaries which are going to take place within the Likud to decide who is going to head up the Likud list. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu is very popular, and it's possible that he might head up that election. Alternatively, Ariel Sharon could win. Now, if Benjamin Netanyahu wins, he may be under very, very considerable pressure to stand, notwithstanding what he has already said. But what he said is perfectly logical, because if he were to be elected, and that would be the likely outcome of an election against Mr. Barak, what it would mean would be that he would be plunged into the situation which faces Barak now, a minority government, a chaotic Knesset, a disintegrating situation which would benefit nobody. You see, what Israel needs now, it's in a critical situation, and it needs a new government, a new prime minister with a broad spectrum of support throughout the whole of the country. It will not get that under Mr. Barak.
Malvern Benjamin of the Likud party. The United States is refusing to meet the European Union later this week for further talks on fighting global warming. It's a setback for EU environment ministers who were meeting in Brussels today. They were trying to agree a new policy that could be accepted by America after the collapse of last month's UN negotiations in The Hague.
Most of the fundamental disagreements that caused the Hague Climate Conference to collapse last month have still not been resolved. The positions of the European Union and of the United States have not shifted sufficiently for progress to be made. Within the EU itself, there has been a determination to settle internal differences. The Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, who walked out of the Hague talks after failing to persuade fellow environment ministers to sign up to a compromise package, has been among those trying to get negotiations back on track. Further talks were scheduled for the end of this week in Oslo, but this afternoon it emerged that the Americans and their negotiating partners would not be turning up. The disagreements are over how emissions reductions agreed in Kyoto in 1997 are achieved. The European Union says countries should simply cut back on the amount of pollution they produce. But the so-called umbrella group of countries, including the US, Japan and Canada, argue that because their forests soak up large quantities of carbon dioxide, which is the main greenhouse gas, they should count towards their targets. Both sides still insist they are committed to a resolution, but accuse each other of failing to compromise. Further attempts to reach an agreement could be made next month at a meeting of the United Nations Environment Programme in Nairobi. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
President Clinton's advisors have warned European Union leaders that their plans to help finance a new Airbus super jumbo jet could spark another trade war with the United States. The European consortium Airbus is widely expected to announce the launch of its massive A3XX airliner project today. It's hoping to compete with the world's largest aircraft manufacturer, the American-based Boeing company.
Airbus is hoping to build the biggest airliner yet, a massive super jumbo jet which could outstrip the current market leader, the Boeing 747. The Airbus project is expected to cost around $11 billion, with up to a third of that figure derived from state loans, divided between Britain, France and Germany. And that's what could set off another trade fight between the European Union and the United States. After Mr. Clinton held talks with EU leaders at the White House on Monday, his economic advisor warned that the Airbus issue should be taken seriously and could create trade difficulties in the future. The White House is undoubtedly echoing the concerns of the Seattle-based Boeing company, which could find its status as the market leader in large jets threatened by the new Euro project. Boeing has asked Airbus to submit proof that the new jet is commercially viable, or to show that the government loans will be made on commercial terms, rather than acting as subsidies. If all goes to plan, the Airbus Jumbo is likely to come to market in around 6 years, when there'll be strong demand for aircraft to replace the Boeing 747, itself first launched in the early 1970s. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Washington.
Well, Mike Miller, editor of Aviation Daily, says that the Airbus project does have the potential to cause a trade war between Europe and America.
In fact, this really is the latest round of conflict between Europe and the U.S. There's been multiple conflicts in aviation and other industries. This is just the latest, and it all revolves around how much should governments support private industries. And this is a perfect case where there's multiple governments trying to support a new program for Europe.
And it could go to the World Trade Organization as the final arbiter, couldn't it?
Well, we're not that far down the path yet. Right now, before the funding is given by the European governments, there is room for negotiation right now. I'm not sure how long the U.S. is prepared to negotiate, but the signal today, or at least Monday in Washington, was that the U.S. fired a shot across the bow of the European industry and said, we're warning you, if you take the path that you're proposing, we're going to make it difficult.
Quite apart from the economic and governmental arguments, there is a fundamental difference of view here between Boeing on the one hand and Airbus on the other, isn't there, into the very future of this sort of aircraft and whether it's needed at all.
Yes, well, the forecasts so far have been, Airbus has said that there's a massive need for this new Super Jumbo, the first double-deck jet ever produced, and Boeing, on the other hand, which is not producing one, is saying, of course, there's very little need. At the same time, reporters with my publication today talked with Phil Condit, the CEO of Boeing, who gave the first strong indication that Boeing will, in fact, move forward with the 747 stretch version, which would compete very highly with the Airbus A3XX. So both sides see that there's a need. It all depends who wants to invest the most and whether they need help with that investment.
Mike Miller in Washington. A 24-year-old yachtswoman is at the center of a dramatic sea rescue in the Southern Ocean. Ellen MacArthur has been sailing in a single-handed round-the-world yacht race, but she'd been asked to alter her course to go to the aid of a French competitor who became stranded after the mast of his boat broke in rough seas near Antarctica. He's now reported to be able to reach land unaided.
Lynn's actually very close to the last position of Yves Parlier, but we've actually literally just had some very good news in from Yves Parlier directly to Ellen and to HQ, which is that he has managed to secure his boat, and at present looks like he may well be able to at least try to attempt to get to land on his own without any direct assistance. So that's some good news, really.
So how will that affect Ellen's attempts to help him? Will she continue, or will she continue with the race now?
She should be able to point herself back in the direction of the race. She's actually very close to him anyway, but having just had that news through from Yves, looks like it's not necessary for her to actually physically go and make contact and stop, which will, of course, relieve her that that he's in good shape, but also relieve her also that she can get on and focus on the race, which is obviously pretty important to her as well.
Indeed, I mean, it's a pretty selfless act on her part to go to his assistance. Were there any concerns about the race and her, her possibly losing her position in that, or was this simply something that she felt she had to do?
These solo skippers are so far from land, so far from help, whilst they are at one moment super competitive and really trying to gain every metre, every mile all the time. At the same time, they have huge respect for the environment they're in and the other skippers around them, and really there's no question at any time, if there's any question of safety or any danger for other skippers, they will immediately go to their help. And that's indeed what's happened this time. There was no news from Yves Parlier for quite some time, a lot of concern and no communication, and that's when she was diverted to his position.
Mark Turner in Paris. The German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder says that workers from Central and Eastern European countries ought to wait 7 years before they get jobs in the European Union once their own countries have joined. His comments followed the EU summit in Nice a week ago, at which the existing 15 members agreed reforms to allow 12 new countries, mostly from the former Soviet bloc, to join from 2003 onwards.
The location was no accident.
The German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder came to the conference to steady nerves. Workers here on the German-Czech border fear that with European Union expansion to the east, their jobs are at risk from cheaper labour across the border. He said EU expansion would move the region from the fringe of the European market to its very centre. To sweeten the pill, the German leader says he wants a transition period of up to 7 years before Eastern workers are free to take up Western jobs. In the run-up to the Nice conference, Chancellor Schröder won friends in the East by backing the former communist countries, especially Poland, in their bid for early EU membership. His comments have already annoyed the Polish government, which says Western jobs should be open to Poles from day one. Yet the fear of hundreds of thousands of Eastern workers flooding the German labour market and driving down pay has sent shudders through the border region. It's widely accepted that after 2010, Germany will need more immigrants to prop up the declining population. More workers will plug the skills gap and help pay for the lavish social system. But at the moment, Germany still has over 3.5 million unemployed. Opening labour markets to the east gradually would buy time. The goal of European Union expansion has cross-party support here, yet ordinary Germans feel their way of life is under threat and their jobs are at risk. The Chancellor's comments were designed to calm those fears. Germany has made its case. It's now for Europe as a whole to decide next year. Rob Broomby, BBC News, Berlin.
This is BBC News. Reminder of the latest headlines. George W. Bush has been setting out his plans for huge tax cuts. And Benjamin Netanyahu's election hopes have been dealt a blow by the Israeli parliament. Still to come, the Piper calls the tune. It's a traditional Scottish Highland welcome for a material girl and her guy. Here's our guy with today's business action, Richard Quest in New York.
Hello. President-elect and chairman meet to discuss the US economy. Just 24 hours before the Fed's due to meet to decide on monetary policy and the direction of interest rates, President-elect George Bush has held a meeting with the chairman of the Fed, Alan Greenspan. Afterwards, neither side commented too much on the economy, but it is known that Mr. Greenspan is worried about the slowdown now underway, and many on Wall Street believe that when the Fed's Open Market Committee meets on Tuesday, it'll vote to shift the bias towards easing. And although an immediate cut in interest rates isn't on the cards, few doubt that one could be far away next year. Turning to the closing numbers on Wall Street, there was a profits warning from Time Warner, which took AOL down quite sharply. Other companies like Gillette announced that they'd be laying off staff because of the economic slowdown. It didn't seem to take its toll too much. The Nasdaq Composite off 28, the Dow Jones Industrials up 10,645. One other story to bring you. It's expected that Airbus Industry will announce the industrial launch of the A3XX, the Super Jumbo. This is despite the fact President Clinton has now sounded a warning that the US might protest to the Europeans over what it sees as illegal subsidies for the financing of the new jet. A look now at the European bourses and how they closed the sessions. London's FTSE up 70, the DAX in Frankfurt up 58, in Paris the CAC 40 gained 47. They clearly took their tone there from the Dow, not the Nasdaq. That's the BBC Business News from New York.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. The leader of Britain's opposition Conservative Party, William Hague, has rejected claims that he's stirring up racial tension over his remarks on policing following the murder of a young boy. The parents of 10-year-old Damilola Taylor, who was found stabbed to death in London earlier this month, have accused Mr. Hague of using their son's murder as a political football.
A community still distraught about the murder of Damilola Taylor, a 10-year-old boy left bleeding to death, finds itself in the middle of a row, not just about politics, but about whether politicians should attack one another over such killings. Already under criticism for exploiting the murder, William Hague has gone further. Speaking to the BBC, he blamed Labour policies and warned a second Labour term would produce more such murders.
There would be more crime. There will be more crime if police numbers and police morale continue to fall. And that will mean, yes, that there are more tragedies, which we all end up discussing.
So another Labour government would create more Damilolas.
Well, another Labour government means lower police morale, it means fewer police, it means more opportunities for the criminals to commit crime.
And that followed a protest from Damilola's parents that Mr. Haig, using the still unsolved murder in a wider argument about police numbers, was exploiting their son's death.
They feel that the focus of all the discussion about their son's death should be in catching the murderers and bringing them to justice. Anything else really causes them a great deal of distress. It's a difficult time for them, and they would like the police to do their job and everybody to help in finding the murderers.
Accused first of playing the race card and now of exploiting a murder, Mr. Haig strongly asserted his right to draw wider political lessons.
I say we will not be bullied. Here I am raising a matter of legitimate and overwhelming public concern.
Labour says it is getting police numbers back up and Mr. Haig is behaving disgracefully.
There is a debate to be had about police numbers and resources and overall public spending and the level of taxation and so on between the three parties. I don't believe that it is remotely in the interests either of the murder investigation or, above all, the sensibilities of the Taylor family for them to be embroiled in this debate, and I deeply regret that the Conservatives have done so.
Yet Mr. Haig has achieved one aim. He's got people talking about street crime. But it's come at one heck of a political price, because he's upset bereaved parents and got people arguing about his judgment too. Andrew Marr, BBC News.
At least 9 people died and 22 others were taken hostage during a prison riot in Brazil. Police are now trying to negotiate a peaceful end to the siege. Most of the hostages, who included children, have been released, but several guards are still being held.
Police are treading carefully. At least 9 lives have already been lost and many more are at risk. They're waiting for the outcome of negotiations, but there's a tangible sense of how bad things are within. Smoke can be seen rising from the prison roof from a fire started by the inmates. Over 300 prisoners, some armed with pistols and knives, are rioting within this maximum security prison. It began during visiting hours on Sunday, when they took 22 people hostage, many of them relatives. This woman waited for news of her 2 children inside. Electricity supplies have been cut off in an attempt to force an end to the crisis. Most hostages have now been released, but the inmates are still holding on to several guards as bargaining power. Police say they're demanding to be moved to other jails with less rigid security. There are also the same complaints which have led to extensive unrest in other Brazilian prisons, like overcrowding and poor hygiene. Judith Maloney, BBC News.
The authorities in Mexico, meanwhile, are trying to evacuate residents from around the Popocatépetl volcano. The government has widened an exclusion zone to 12 kilometers from the volcano's crater after several days of increasing volcanic activity. Many residents, though, have been refusing to leave, saying they're afraid to leave their properties unguarded.
The locals call it Popo, or Dongoyo. The inhabitants of Puebla have got used to life under the volcano, and many see no reason to leave. The yearly festival of the Virgin Mary has been as much a fixture of their lives as the volcano on the horizon. Some fear that if they go, their houses may be looted.
Nothing's happening. First comes God. The Popo is calm.
The festival must go on, but the signs that scientists are detecting are shaking some people's faith. The inhabitants of Puebla are beginning to heed the warnings. They were kept awake by the volcano's rumblings and periodic tremors. They gathered up essential belongings and boarded the buses to take them out of the danger zone. 180 refugee centers have been set up to cope. The government wants over 40,000 people moved to safety. The problem is that a dome of solid lava is beginning to build up inside the crater. That acts a little like the lid of a pressure cooker. If the gas and lava can't get out, the fear is that Popo could blow. Raphael Jezeram, BBC News.
The pop star Madonna and her fiancé, the film director Guy Ritchie, have arrived in the Scottish Highlands ahead of their wedding there later this week. They landed by private jet yesterday afternoon at Inverness Airport and amid tight security were immediately whisked away to Skibo Castle, where their fairy tale wedding is due to take place on Friday.
Through clear blue skies, the jet bringing Madonna and her family north touched down at Inverness Airport at lunchtime. It was a traditional Highland welcome, but for the occasion the piper had mastered one of Madonna's biggest hits. An aide carried her daughter Lourdes off the plane, followed closely by the bridegroom Guy Ritchie. And the star herself, resplendent in a tartan coat. Baby son Rocco was last to emerge, brought to a waiting car by a nanny. Despite the intense media interest, only a handful of fans turned up.
It's the excitement of seeing a superstar, well, a world-famous person in Inverness. It's just so unbelievable.
It was great to know she was coming to Inverness, and I just say to them congratulations, and I hope they have a really nice Highland welcome.
The entourage then sped off for the hour's drive north to Skibo Castle, where the couple will spend the week relaxing before their wedding there on Friday. Dornoch is very much a town in waiting tonight for the biggest media event ever in this area. But the only chance locals will get to glimpse Madonna and Guy Ritchie is when they have their son Rocco christened here later in the week. Carol Jones, BBC News, Dornoch.
I'm Clarence Mitchell, and this is BBC News.
Hello there. I thought I'd take you over to Europe to see what our European cousins are having to contend with weather-wise. And as you can see, high pressure the dominant feature for the Mediterranean, but out towards the west, this is the front that's bringing those wet and windy conditions to us in the UK for this morning's period and into the afternoon. It's also affecting parts of Iberia down towards Portugal and Spain, and really quite horrible conditions wherever you are. If you're perhaps heading off there on holiday, I'm afraid that will persist for today and into tomorrow as it tracks further eastwards. We are also seeing some showery conditions out towards Italy, Greece and Turkey, and again that high pressure the dominant feature through Central and Eastern Europe, which means on the temperatures we are going to see quite a plunge in those. It could also mean clearer skies with that high pressure dominating and some mist and fog conditions, even some icy stretches and some frosty patches. So if you are perhaps planning to fly into Central and Eastern Europe, do check. There might well be delays or cancellations on those flights due to that mist and fog. So let's look at the best of the temperatures then. As you can see, Athens, still a very pleasant 15 degrees Celsius. That's around about 60 Fahrenheit for today, and tomorrow a wee bit more in the way of showery weather pushing in towards Greece. As we look at Paris, if you're heading off there perhaps to do a bit of late Christmas shopping, as you can see, temperatures not too bad on the mild side, and we are expecting that beautiful sunshine to break through on Wednesday. As we get into Scandinavia, pretty chilly conditions, but again, sunshine breaking through, as you can see, towards Oslo. Also for the south, we are getting a wee bit of an improvement out towards the coast if you're heading there for Christmas and through the Balearics. But for Wednesday, we are expecting some showers to persist, particularly for western parts of Portugal and down towards the Canary Islands. And again, those showers just running along the Mediterranean there, through the Greek Isles, also southern parts of Italy and for the Balkans. Bringing you back to home now, in parts of the northeast for this overnight period and into this morning, we do have, I'm afraid, a few fog patches to contend with, and that's northeast England and the Midlands, and as I said, that could persist into the morning, so difficult driving conditions through the drive time period. We've also got this front, as we saw on the European map, just tracking in towards the west, and that will steadily push quite a thick band of cloud and rain northwards and eastwards throughout today, and particularly for western areas we are expecting up to 30 millimetres of rainfall for today, which is well over an inch, so further flooding could be possible. Don't forget that rain is falling on saturated ground, and it will hit Ireland in the overnight period. Temperatures really pegged back, so we've got some quite blustery conditions to contend with, particularly for Ireland. Also moving down towards Devon and Cornwall, as I mentioned, that will move further northwards throughout the day, and the Bristol area not getting away with it either, even across into Wales, so do take care on those roads. We're talking misty, murky, a lot of low cloud and quite persistent rain. For the rest of the country, through central and eastern areas, as I mentioned, that mist and fog could persist into this morning, and you might just see some frosty patches earlier on too. That rain steadily tracking northwards throughout the day with those southeasterly gales for western parts of Ireland and Scotland, of course. Temperature-wise, fairly what we'd expect this time of year. The best of them down towards the West Country in the rain and the wind, though it really will feel a lot colder than that. Bit of sports weather for you, Folkestone and Wolverhampton going ahead on the horse racing. That's what you're looking like, brolly weather really. Mildish temperatures though, not too bad. And for Wednesday, we are looking at this drape of a front just pushing down through northeastern parts of Scotland, the West Country, also for Wales and northwest England. So that means more in the way of rain, but brighter behind it.
Who's making money? Who's losing money?
Following the trading world around the globe.
World Business Report next on BBC News 24.
Breaking the news.
Tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people, I offer my concession.
Thousands attended the only speech of this, his third visit, a final presidential contribution.
Torrential rain and gale force winds causing yet more flooding.
24 hours a day, BBC News 24. What made the news this year? And how will those events shape our world in the year to come? World Review Beyond 2000 takes a closer look at an American election to remember.
When votes are cast, we count them.
The political crisis in the Middle East, peacekeepers in Sierra Leone, and mixed times in Asia. Plus, how will we cope with an aging population? Asylum seekers, the genetic revolution. World Review Beyond 2000, Saturday at 11:30 on BBC News 24.
Hello, good morning. This is BBC News 24. I'm Clarence Mitchell. It's exactly 2:30, a summary of the latest national and international news stories. The parents of the murdered schoolboy Damilola Taylor have accused the Conservative leader William Hague of using their son's death as a political football. 10-year-old Damilola was killed on a housing estate in Peckham in South London. The Tory leaders said there was a link between the attack and the fall in police numbers under Labour, but the Taylors have accused him of exploiting their son's death.
All the discussion about their son's death should be in catching the murderers and bringing them to justice. Anything else really causes them a great deal of distress. It's a difficult time for them, and they would like the police to do their job and everybody to help in finding the murderers.
All nurses have won a pay rise of at least 3.7%, an increase above the level of inflation. It's part of a wage settlement that's designed to make nursing a more attractive profession. More experienced nurses will get a rise of at least 5%. Doctors have been awarded 3.9%. The increases will come into effect from next April. The British sailor Ellen MacArthur has resumed her single-handed global yacht race after diverting to